The silver cuff had burned a thin line into Niven's wrist for 15 years, and she had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a scar, not because the pain was gone, but because pain that never changes eventually becomes part of the background, like rain or cold floors or the sound of wind coming through gaps in stone walls. She was 24 years old. She had worn the cuff since she was 9. She had been told it was her mother's. A keepsake. A remembrance. The seamstresses at Ashenvale Keep had helped her fasten it on her first morning there, their fingers quick and efficient, their faces kind in the practiced way of people who feel guilty about something they are not going to stop doing. She had believed them. She had been 9. She had believed everything they told her. Now she sat in the main receiving chamber of the keep, on a wooden chair that had no cushion, her wrists bound in front of her with rope, not to prevent escape, but because the compact demanded it, and she waited for Ravik of the Stone Marrow to arrive and sign the Alliance Charter that would seal her fate as a living bond pledge. This was how the 5-territory compact worked. When a new High Alpha was confirmed, the charter required a witness seal, not a signature, not a document, a person. An unclaimed Omega offered as a living bond to the weakest of the 5 territories, to demonstrate that the new High Alpha's authority could be trusted, that he would not absorb the smaller packs, that he would honor the Alliance over his own hunger for land. The bond pledge would live out her years in service there, proof walking and breathing, untouchable by war. It was not cruel, Magistrate Torvin had explained when he came to collect her 3 days ago. It was tradition. It was necessary. It was the only thing standing between the 5 territories and the kind of succession war that had not happened in 100 years, but that everyone over 60 still remembered in their bones. He had said all of this while looking at a point somewhere above her left shoulder. He had not once looked directly at her face. She was not stupid, she knew what it was. The chair was hard, the rope was tighter than it needed to be. The receiving chamber was cold in the specific way of rooms built for ceremony rather than warmth. High ceiling, stone floor, a row of narrow windows that let in light without retaining any heat from it. 4 guards stood at the corners. None of them spoke. None of them looked at her unless they thought she wasn't watching. One of them, a woman posted at the eastern corner, broad-shouldered, grey-braided, wearing armor that looked older than the keep itself, had set a cup of water on the floor near Niven's feet sometime in the middle of the first night. No explanation, no eye contact, just the sound of the cup touching stone, and then silence. Niven had to bend forward at an uncomfortable angle to drink from it because her hands were bound, and the cup had no handle long enough to grip properly. She had done it anyway, slowly, without spilling, and the water was cold and clean and tasted of the northern springs that fed Ashenvale's cisterns, the same springs she had hauled buckets from every morning for 15 years. She did not cry over it. She was too tired to cry. But she pressed her lips together afterward and felt the shape of the gesture land somewhere in her chest and decided it mattered. She stored it there alongside the other small things she had collected over the years. Evidence that the world was not entirely composed of indifference. The doors opened just before dawn. The draft that entered with him was different from the cold of the room. Not warmer exactly, but charged the way air changes before a storm, a pressure shift she felt in her eardrums and behind her eyes. The torches on the nearest wall guttered all at once, then steadied. She did not look up. She had learned, at 9, that looking up too quickly was misread as challenge, and challenge got you hurt. So she kept her eyes on the floor and listened to his footsteps instead. Heavy, unhurried, even pacing nothing wasted, the stride of someone who had spent years moving through difficult terrain and had learned to conserve energy not from laziness, but from the long-game intelligence of a man who expected to need it later. He stopped somewhere to her right. Someone tied her hands, he said. It was not addressed to her. It was addressed to the room, to the guards, to Torvin who had entered behind him, to the concept of the situation itself. Low voice, consonants precise, tone stripped of inflection in a way that was somehow more dangerous than anger. "It is part of the compact protocol," Torvin said. "The bond pledge must be presented as." "I know what the compact says." A pause. "Untie her hands." "The elders require." I said, "Untie her hands." No one moved for 3 seconds. Then she heard one of the guards cross the floor and felt the rope loosen at her wrists and then fall away, and the blood rushing back into her fingers was so sudden and sharp that she pressed them against her thighs to contain the sensation. She looked up. Ravik of the Stone Marrow was younger than she had expected. She had built an image from rumors, a man who had held the northern ridge during the Gravast incursion when he was 22, who had brokered the Coldwater Treaty with the mountain clans through 3 days of continuous negotiation, who had written the Omega protection standards that the territories had been arguing about implementing for the past 4 years. She had expected someone who looked carved from the same myth. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dressed in dark traveling clothes over functional armor that was worn rather than polished. His hair was dark, cut short, and there was a scar along his jaw that had healed white and clean, the scar of someone who had taken the blow straight rather than flinching from it. His eyes were the color of deep water in shadow, not black, not blue, something between them, and they were fixed on her with an attention that felt different from the way the guards watched her. Not assessment, recognition. He blinked. A slow, controlled thing, the blink of someone who has just received information that requires careful processing. "What is your name?" he said. "Niven." He repeated it, once, quietly, the way you repeat a word when you want to understand it rather than simply hear it. His jaw tightened by a fraction. Then he turned away and walked to the table where the Alliance Charter waited on its velvet backing, and he stood there with his back to the room, and she watched his shoulders rise and fall once, deliberately, and she understood from the mechanics of it that he was controlling something. The way you control something when releasing it would cause damage you cannot afford. She had done this herself for 15 years. She had never seen someone who looked like him do it, and she did not know what to make of that. They did not let her sleep the night before the signing. Torvin came at midnight and explained again what her role required. Stand at the table. Place her bound wrists on the charter. Remain still while the High Alpha signed in her presence. Be transferred to the Hollowmere delegation the following morning. Cause no disruption. Say nothing. Understand that what she was doing served a purpose larger than herself, that thousands of people in the 5 territories were safer because she was willing to do this. "I understood the first time," she said. Torvin's mouth compressed. He was a square-built man with a shaved head and the particular stillness of someone who had learned early that visible emotion was a liability, and he used that stillness like a shield. "You are cooperating. I don't have a choice." "No," he said, "you don't." He left. The guardwoman, her name was Earth, from a brief exchange that morning when Earth had brought her a change of clothes and looked the other way while she dressed, came in after midnight with a blanket, heavy wool, faintly smelling of cedar and oil, the kind of blanket that belonged to someone rather than to a room. She set it on the chair and walked back to her post without a word. Niven pulled it around her shoulders and sat with her back against the wall and stared at the ceiling and thought about the silver cuff on her wrist. It had been burning more intensely since Ravik arrived, not in a way she could explain, but the thin ring of skin beneath the silver had gone from the dull ache she had known for 15 years to something sharper, more insistent, as though the metal had an objection it needed to register. She had spent years learning to ignore it. Ignoring it now required more effort than it usually did. She did not understand why. He came to her at 2 in the morning, through the servants' entrance on the north side of the chamber. carrying a lantern and a cloth pouch that smelled of herbs she could not immediately name. She heard him before she saw him, that same particular footstep, even, deliberate, nothing wasted. She did not pretend to have been sleeping. "You should not be here," she said. "I know." He set the lantern on the floor and crouched in front of her. The light made his scar look more pronounced and his eyes look darker, made everything about him look older and more tired than he had appeared that morning. "I wanted to look at your wrists. They're fine." The rope left marks. Rope usually does. He looked at her with something that was not quite amusement and not quite frustration, settling somewhere between the two. Then he held out his hand, palm up, waiting. She placed her wrists across it. His hands were warm, large, the knuckles scarred, the kind of hands that had done a great deal of physical work that most people in his position paid others to do. He examined the rope marks carefully, his thumb tracing the edge of each abrasion, and then his gaze moved to the silver cuff. He went still. "How long have you worn this?" "Since I was 9. "It's burning you." He turned her wrist gently to show her the inner edge, where the skin beneath had gone from the pale pink of old irritation to something rawer. "Here and here." "I know." "Has it always done this?" "The burn, it's worse than usual lately." "Since when?" She did not answer, because the honest answer was since you walked into this room, and she did not know what to do with that yet. He looked up at her. "Can I take it off, just to look at the skin beneath?" Her first instinct was to refuse, not because she didn't trust him. She could not have explained why, but she trusted him in the same way she trusted the ground to be solid, not from evidence but from something more fundamental, but because the cuff had been on her wrist for 15 years and removal felt like losing a landmark, even a painful one. "Yes," she said. He worked the clasp slowly, carefully, his fingers aware of the rawness beneath and determined not to press against it. The clasp released with a sound like a breath, quiet and final. The cuff came away. What happened next was not loud. It was not dramatic in the way of lightning or breaking glass. It was the opposite, a sudden, profound silence in her mind, as though a sound she had been hearing for so long she'd stopped registering it simply ceased, and the absence of it was deafening. She gasped, not from pain, from the rush of something that filled the space the silence left. Warmth spreading from the bare wrist through her arm and into her chest and down through her core, like a fire that had been banked for 15 years suddenly given air. Ravik went completely still. He was watching her face, and she could see from his expression that he saw the change, whatever it was, visible in a way she could not control. "What was that?" she said. Her voice sounded different to her own ears, clearer. "I don't know yet." He opened his cloth pouch, produced a small jar of salve, amber-colored, smelling of calendula and something sharper, and began applying it to the raw ring of skin with the same care he had used removing the cuff. "But I intend to find out before morning." She looked at her bare wrist. The skin beneath the silver was marked and raw, a circle of damage she had been carrying for 15 years without fully seeing. Then she looked at her palm, then at the room, and something had shifted, not in the room but in the way she perceived it. A clarity that had not been there before, like cleaning a window she had not realized was fogged. She pressed her palm flat against the floor, and saw it. Not with her eyes saw cold stone grey-dark in the lantern light, but beneath that, through the channel of touch, something else moved, a history, the weight of every step taken across this floor, and among those steps a specific sequence, quick, purposeful, moving from the south corner to the document table to the door, repeated, 3 nights running, the most recent repetition last night. Torvin. She knew his step pattern from 15 years of sharing corridors. He had visited the charter table after dark 3 times. done something she could not quite see at this distance because the impression faded at the edges of her reach. But the pattern was wrong. A magistrate has no reason to visit a signing document at midnight, 3 nights before the ceremony. She pulled her hand from the floor. Ravik was watching her. "I need to tell you something," she said. It was Elder Goat, who came to her before sunrise alone, carrying a lantern, and the expression of a man who has finally made a decision after a long time of failing to make it. He was old, 70 at least, with a white beard and joints that cracked when he lowered himself to sit across from her on the floor, because there was only one chair and she was already in it, and he waved off her attempt to stand. He sat with his knees bent and his hands folded, and he looked at the silver cuff sitting on the floor between them, the cuff Ravik had not replaced after treating her wrist. "I wrote the intake registry the day you arrived here," Galt said, 15 years ago. She waited. The cuff was in the intake notes, keepsake from deceased mother, to be kept on child's person at all times. He paused. "I wrote those words. I was told to write them." By whom? Karen dressed. The name landed between them like a stone into water. Ravik's sworn brother. He was 12 years old when you arrived here, and already his father's instrument. The cuff is not your mother's. It is a suppressor, old craft, silver work from the Western clans. It prevents the manifestation of certain rare bloodline abilities. The clarity she had felt since the cuff came off sharpened into something almost physical. What abilities? Galt looked at her directly for the first time in the conversation, the look of a man who has stopped averting his eyes. "Your mother's family were sight-bearers. You know what that is?" She did, vaguely. Old stories, the kind told to children at night. Wolves who could see truth through touch, who could not be deceived by documents or signed agreements that contained hidden language, because when they pressed their hands to the page, they felt the intent behind every word. "There has not been a confirmed sight-bearer in 3 generations, Galt said. The bloodline was lost, or so the records show, but records can be altered. I know this because I have altered them." His voice did not crack on the admission, but it came close. Karen's father understood what a sight-bearer would mean for the Alliance Charter. The Charter has 17 clauses. Not all of them say what they appear to say. She pressed her palm against the floor again, deliberately this time, and reached with the sight toward the document table across the chamber. She found it. The Charter. Its weight on the velvet, the texture of the ink, the specific shape of each clause, and nested inside the 17th, hidden in the language like a blade inside a loaf of bread, a secondary clause invisible to the eye but legible to the touch. It granted Karen-dressed emergency authority over the Stone Marrow succession if Ravik died without an heir, an authority that superseded the Alliance Council. A door hidden in plain sight. The charter was scheduled to be signed in 4 hours. The signing chamber filled with people at dawn. Representatives from all 5 territories, pack leaders, elder council members, foreign advisors, warriors in dress armor, the gallery above filled with witnesses, the noise built in layers until the chamber hummed with collective anticipation. Niven stood at the table. She had not been bound again. Ravik had seen to that, but she stood in position as tradition required, the living seal waiting to be confirmed. She had not put the silver cuff back on. No one had noticed yet, or if they had not said anything. She was, after all, a seamstress, an omega, a woman whose role today was to stand still and mean something symbolically and then be transferred to Hollowmere and forgotten. She watched Karan dressed enter from the east door. She had seen him twice before at a distance over the years. He was 27 now, lean and sharp-featured, with the restless intelligence of someone always calculating 3 moves ahead. He moved through the chamber with the ease of a man who owned it, touching shoulders, laughing at something the Hollowmere pack leader said, working the room with a practiced fluency that looked like warmth but landed, under the sight, as something colder and more deliberate. He had not yet noticed the cuff was gone from her wrist. Ravik entered last. The room changed when he entered the way a room changes when weather turns. Not a dramatic shift, but a fundamental one. Something in the air pressure. Something in the quality of attention. He wore the High Alpha's formal armor over a dark shirt, and he wore it the way he wore everything, as though the clothing was incidental to the man rather than defining him. He took his position at the table. His eyes found hers across the charter's velvet surface, and held for one moment. What passed between them was not a plan or a signal, but something simpler and older. Steadiness, the kind that does not require words. The Elder Council began the ceremony in the formal language of the old tongue, dense and archaic, the ritual weight of it filling the chamber. Niven stood and let the sight move through her palm where it rested against the edge of the table. Reading the room, reading the small deceits embedded in the morning, reading the micro-expressions and held breaths of people who sensed something was from the chaos, and were hoping to benefit from the chaos. And Karen dressed, seated at the right flank of the table, whose certainty she could feel through the floor, enormous, settled, absolute, the certainty of a man who does not yet know he has reason to be afraid. The ceremony reached the bond pledge confirmation. The Alliance Charter requires a living seal, the Lead Elder declared. The bond pledge Niven, presented unclaimed and unbound, will place her hands upon the Charter as witness to the High Alpha's signature. She was already at the table. She looked at the Charter. She looked at Karan. His gaze dropped to her wrist, the bare wrist, the absent cuff, and she watched the polite dismissiveness leave his face. She pressed both palms flat against the Charter. The sight did not whisper, it did not illuminate gradually, it erupted. The hidden clause in the 17th article rose out of the page like heat from stone, not visible in the way light is visible, but present in the way truth is present, undeniable by anyone in the room with a conscience or a wolf's instinct for what was real. Every wolf in the chamber felt it. The sensation moved through the room like a pressure wave, and she heard the sharp collective intake of breath from 40 people at once, and someone said, "What is that?" And she heard the Elder Council surge forward, and she heard Karan's chair scrape back from the table. "The 17th clause," she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than she expected it to be. "It grants succession authority to Karan dressed of the stone marrow if the High Alpha dies without heir. It is not visible in the text. It was embedded in the ink." She looked at Karan directly. "And you arranged for the High Alpha's father to be in the wrong valley at the wrong time during the Greyvast incursion, which was not an incursion at all." The room detonated. Not with violence, with sound, voices, shouts, the crack of the gallery railing as people pressed against it, the scrape of chairs, the lead elder demanding order in 3 languages, none of which worked. Karen moved toward the door. He was fast, faster than his relaxed posture had suggested, the speed of someone who had always maintained an exit plan. He made it to the door. Ravik was faster. 2 steps, a grip on Karan's collar, and a stop so absolute it was almost quiet. Ravik held his sworn brother with one hand, not violently but with a finality that made violence unnecessary, and looked at him with the expression of a man absorbing a betrayal that rewrites 15 years of shared history. "Ravik," Karen began. "Don't," Ravik said, just that word, the same tone he had used for the rope on her wrists that first morning, not anger but the removal of negotiation as an option. He handed Karan to the Iron Ridge guards without ceremony and walked back to the table. The chamber was still erupting. Half the representatives were on their feet. The elders clustered, arguing in rapid undertones. The gallery witnesses pressed against the railing, 5 conversations happening simultaneously, none of them quiet. Ravik picked up the charter. He looked at it for a moment, then set it back down and reached inside his armor, producing a folded piece of blank paper. She understood only later that this was significant, that he had come prepared for this morning, that he had spent the night between their conversation and the dawn writing a version of this in his head. "The Alliance Charter will be rewritten," he said. He did not shout. He did not need to. The room quieted around him the way rooms quiet around certainty. "The 17 clauses will be reviewed by the full council with a sight-bearer present to verify each one." A pause. "We reconvene in 3 days. Anyone who objects to the delay is welcome to explain to me personally why they need a document with hidden language signed before it can be verified." No one objected. He looked at Niven. "The bond pledge provision is suspended pending charter review. She is not transferred to Hollowmere. She is not transferred anywhere." His voice was even, but beneath it, held in the same controlled grip he had used since the moment he first walked into this chamber, was something that was not policy. "That clause is also being reviewed." Galt rose from his seat on the elder panel. His knees cracked. He walked to the center of the chamber and looked at Niven, and bowed. Not a protocol bow, but the bow of a very old man setting something down that he had carried for too long. Then he straightened and moved to stand beside Ravik. "I will second the High Alpha's motion," he said. It was not precisely how the Alliance voting process was meant to work. No one pointed this out. The workroom where Niven had spent 15 years was at the northeast corner of the keep, a low-ceilinged room with 2 good windows and a work table scarred from decades of pins and shears. The smell of it was specific and irreplaceable: wool dust, lye-washed linen, the faint sweetness of beeswax used to smooth thread. She had repaired every crack in the wall plaster and replaced the window latch twice and re-leveled the work table legs when the stone beneath shifted in the second hard winter. She knew every inch of it with the intimacy of a person who had made a small space into a fortress against a world that did not have much room for her. She had never once sat on the floor. She was sitting on the floor now, back against the work table, when Ravik found her. He knocked first. This surprised her more than she could account for. He came in and stood for a moment, looking at the room, and then he sat on the floor across from her without being invited and without asking, which she liked for a reason she could not immediately name. It felt like he belonged there already. "The council is still arguing," he said. "That seems like their baseline condition." Yes. Something moved through his expression, almost amusement. It suited him. "Galt is testifying. He says it will take several hours." She turned her bare wrist over in her lap. The raw skin was healing faster than it should have, faster than normal healing, the repair happening at a cellular level, the warmth of a body that had been half-functioning for 15 years finally allowed to do what it was built to do. "Can the sight be trained?" she asked. "What I have now is limited to proximity, to touch. I couldn't read the room from across the hall." "It can be trained, or so the old texts say." A pause full of the kind of honesty that doesn't come easily. "I read 3 of them last night." "You didn't sleep." "Neither did you." They sat with that for a moment, the quiet of 2 people who have been awake all night on the same side of something, and know it. "I need to tell you something," he said, the same words she had used the night before, in the dark of the receiving chamber, hours ago that felt like a different year. "When I walked into that room yesterday and first, He stopped, started again. "I know what the bond is. I have known since I was a child what it means when an alpha recognizes his mate. I was not prepared for it to happen while you were sitting in rope and I was expected to sign a document sending you away for the rest of your life." She said nothing, let the silence do its work. "I would not have signed it," he said. "I want you to know that. Not because of the hidden clause, not because of Karan, before I knew any of that." His eyes, the deep water color that had a warmth in them not immediately visible, were steady on hers. "I would not have signed it." She believed him. Not because belief was easy, or because she wanted to, but because the sight did not lie, and what she felt through the floor between them was a man telling the truth at the cost of considerable composure. "The charter still needs to be rewritten," she said. "Yes, and the border territories will have opinions about the delay. They always do. And Karan's trial will be long and complicated and something I am not going to think about before noon." He said it with a flatness that was not resignation, but something more deliberate, a conscious setting aside, a choice to be here for 5 more minutes before the weight of everything outside this room came back. "Right now, I would like to know if you are all right." She thought about it honestly, not the polite version, not the one designed to reassure or deflect, the real answer. She was not all right in the way that meant nothing was wrong. She was not all right in the way that meant 15 years had not happened or had not left marks, but she was all right in the way that mattered right now in this room, with the beeswax smell and the familiar light, through 2 good windows and this man sitting on the floor across from her like he had nowhere more important to be. "Yes," she said, "I think so." He nodded once, not satisfied. She understood already that he was the kind of person who would not be satisfied easily, who would keep asking, keep noticing when her answer changed. She understood this the same way she understood the floor was solid, not from evidence, from something older. Outside, the mountain finches started up in the eaves, their sharp 3-note call at full sunrise. The light through the windows turned from grey to gold. Somewhere above them in the main hall, the Alliance Council was arguing about treaty language and hidden clauses and site-bearer rights under the new compact. And it was loud, and it was going to be very long, and none of it was going to be simple. But in the northeast workroom, in the quiet between the morning light and the noise of everything that came next, Niven set her bare wrist on the floor between them, and Ravik set his hand over hers, and they stayed there while the sun climbed the wall, neither of them speaking, both of them holding the particular stillness of people who have arrived somewhere unexpected and are not yet ready to stand up and leave. The silver cuff sat on the work table behind her. She had not thrown it away. She would not throw it away. Ravik had understood that without being told, the same way he had understood that some things should not be destroyed, but set in plain sight, labeled for exactly what they were, so that no one who came after could ever pretend it had been otherwise. Outside, the finches sang their 3 notes. The gold moved across the floor. The voices from the hall drifted in from the corridor beyond, complicated, necessary, important voices, and the world moved on the way the world does, demanding and continuous and full of things that needed doing. Neither of them moved. Not yet, not for 1 more minute. That was enough.